Friends, I'm Steve Beaman, and this is the Steve Beaman Journey. It's Monday, November 10th, 2025, and we are on the financial path. Well, today's program is dedicated to the election that just took place in New York, to Zoran Mandami, and to his equals in the House and Senate, Bernie Sanders and AOC. And I'll throw Robert Reich, the famed economist, in for that. And when I say famed, I should say infamous, but we'll throw him in just for matter of fact, because these people are all part of the chain and the train that wants to tax the billionaires. So today, I want to look at the reality of, should we tax the billionaires? Should we fight to get those billionaires to contribute more to society? Let's take a look at that on this episode of the Steve Beaman Journey.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In a world of uncertainty, where business, freedom, and the future hang in the balance, one voice rises with clarity, experience, wisdom, and conviction. This is the Steve Beaman Show, the voice of the independent American.
Welcome back, and let's just join together as we talk on this financial path about billionaires, fantasy, fact, and fiscal reality. So welcome back, my friends, as we address this specifically to the new mayor of New York, Zoran Mandami. What a frightening thought to most of us who've studied any history and lived through the 20th century, where we saw those socialist fantasies play out. They didn't work then, they won't work now. But I want to address specifically when Mandami says there should be no billionaires. And he's jumped on that bandwagon with Bernie Sanders and AOC and Robert Reich and the like, saying billionaires are bad. They're all that creates problems in this country. And I know from the comments I'm going to get, some of you are going to say, why are you sucking up to billionaires? I'm not. I'm sucking up to something called the American dream, a dream in which you and I build a bigger pie, lift a higher shoreline, a system in which we build more, not consume and not destroy to try to get more, but we actually build. So today, I want to talk about one of the most emotionally charged ideas, frankly, in modern politics, and it's sickening to me to even have to talk about it. But we seem to be in a time in our country where people are once again going after the envy economy, and that envy economy will not end well. Tax the billionaires, they say. By the way, you'll notice that Bernie's not saying millionaires and billionaires anymore. Well, that's because he's a millionaire. They don't want you to know it, but in the last year, I think AOC brought in something like $20 million from getting people ginned up about the oligarchy. Well, they're no longer part of the impoverished class. It's no different than Mandami. I think his rent is $14,000 a month, paid for by his mother. And he has a, $14 million trust fund? These aren't people like you and me. These are wealthy people preaching a gospel of envy, and they do it because they make money on it. But let's take a look at the tax the billionaires phrase. It's on campaign posters, social media feeds, and cable news virtually every day. It's a powerful phrase, and it catches people's attention because, well, it's simple. It's simple to comprehend. Tax the billionaires. They shouldn't exist. They're the bad guys, right? But as I've often said, and if you've watched, you've heard me say it before, economics is philosophy with math. So before we decide what's fair, I'd like to spend a minute with you talking about what's true. So I want to start with some facts. According to Forbes 2024 articles, or according to, I should say in 2024, there are roughly 2,781 billionaires in the worldwide. And by the way, this isn't Forbes, some right-wing conservative magazine alone. MSNBC just put out an article with basically the same numbers. So this isn't just right-wing talk. MSNBC is hardly a conservative bastion, and they gave almost identical numbers to this. So I think we're fair to say there are roughly 2,780 billionaires worldwide. Of that, 735 of them live in the United States. More than in any other country, of course, but that's a lot of folks. And their combined net worth of those 735 people is about $5.5 trillion. Now, it can go up or down depending on the market. So, again, somebody's going to say that's not the right number. It's 7 trillion or 3. It's going to be close to 5.5 trillion depending when you look at the math. Globally, the 2,700 billionaires have about 14.2 trillion in aggregate worth. And again, that's dependent on markets. So you're taking a look at some big numbers here, and they look enormous. But what do they really mean? Let's put some real-world context to them. The federal government of the United States will spend this year about $6.5 trillion. So even if Washington confiscated every penny of every American billionaire, it wouldn't pay the bill for the whole year. It would keep government running for about 9 months. Then, 1 year later, it's gone. Now, let's assume we took their money and divided. I see these statistics on Facebook all the time, and I think people don't know math very well. If you took that money and divided it by the roughly 330 million Americans equally, so we all said, let's get a piece of their pie, every one of us would get about $16,000 one time. That's it, one time. Then it's gone. So you have enough for a used car or a semester of college, and then it's gone. The money spent, the wealth that created the jobs, the innovation, the investment has been destroyed. Well, now let's go bigger. Let's seize all the wealth of all the billionaires on earth, 14.5 trillion of them, and hand it out to just Americans. Let's not split this up around the world. Let's split it up just to Americans. Now, we've raised it to about 43,000 a person. Well, that's better, but it's a one-time bonus. One time. Not lifetime income. Now, that single distribution has now destroyed the economic engine that produced it. And that's the first great truth. There isn't enough money in the billionaire class. You could erase all of them tomorrow, and the fundamentals of the American economy don't change. Sure, we get a bonus, but what does that do to inflation because of that increased demand? That would wipe out the value of your bonus real quick. So why does that slogan persist? Why is it AOC can make $20 million selling that idea? And it's because many people believe that billionaires hoard money. They hoard it, which otherwise would be used to fund schools, healthcare, climate programs, their own favorite programs. But there's several points here. First of all, billionaires don't hoard their money. They do one of four things with it. They save it in a bank, which means there's money for that bank to lend money to home mortgages and car loans and business loans. They invest it in private companies, which expand the economy. They give it away in charity, or they spend it. And if they spend it, who wouldn't want to have them as your customer? And we've talked about this before when they had, I think it was Bezos, had that big wedding over in Europe. We all talked about, wouldn't we love to have him as a customer? There's only four things they can do. None of those destroy wealth. None of those prevent you from being wealthy. But when you tax it to the government, that destroys the wealth engine. And we've seen that play out time and time again. For those of you who want to be in that early 20s age group, the Gen Zs, or the next generation, whatever's coming up, I hear constantly from you guys that the mantra of socialism should be, well, it will work this time. It never worked. I watched in the 20th century as it failed around the world, and it still has. Unless you want to migrate to Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, good luck with that. Even China has accepted that in order to grow its economy, it has to embrace certain free market principles. The productive side of the Chinese economy comes out of the free market part of the Chinese economy. But I also want to spend a minute with you separating wealth from income, because this is a discussion that's going to be happening more and more in the United States. when you and I earn a paycheck, as you well know, we pay income tax immediately. Billionaires, however, much of their wealth comes from companies in which they're invested, stock options in their own companies. So they're given the right to buy a stock at a price which may have a higher market value later. I mean, that sounds great. If you look at, Amazon, Tesla, Meta, Berkshire Hathaway, or any other private firm, that's how they get paid typically, a big part of their compensation. Well, those shares fluctuate every single day. They only become taxable when they're sold, right? So you have a distinction here. I mean, you may say Elon Musk's worth $500 million, but that's in company stock. It's not in cash. It's not liquid. Doesn't mean he has that money to spend. Yes, he can borrow against the stock. Yes, he can sell the stock. But the fact of the matter is his money's being used. It's not just being stationary, stagnant, and wasted. He's using that money. And yes, a bunch of you people, especially on the left, are going, well, that's how they avoid taxes. They just borrow against their stock. Well, you can do that too if you start building assets. You can borrow a mortgage on your house. That's the same principle. People spend second mortgages all the time. There's no difference. It's the idea that, yeah, if you want to avoid paying taxes, you borrow the money. But that has risks to it. How many millionaires have become non-millionaires because they borrowed money against assets that then depreciated? I mean, the markets don't always go up. Sometimes they go down. And if you've borrowed against those securities, you're going to find out real quick that that strategy didn't pay off. But in reality, when we look at billionaires today, for the most part, their equity is tied up in factories and satellites and employees. And to tax then that unrealized value that people want to do, well, if you want to do that, you've got to assign a value. You have to do an audit every year on the value of those assets. I mean, can you imagine the bureaucracy of that? Trying to determine what everybody's worth is every year? What's your house worth? Who knows what it's worth? It's not worth anything until you sell it. What's your car worth? What's that stock you hold in a private company worth? Nobody knows. You can estimate it, but that estimate can change dramatically from year to year. So how do you know how to value those assets? I mean, you take a house from $400,000 you bought, and in theory, at the end of a year, it's worth $80,000 or $480,000. Do you want to be taxed on that $80,000 of unrealized gains? Of course not, because it's not real money. Well, the same is true in the stock market. If you own a company and you bought the stock for $1 and it's now worth 15, you think, if you don't sell it, why should you pay tax on that theoretical gain? You don't know what that real number is. For all you know, it went from 15 to 50 in a year or 15 to back to $1. You don't know until you sell the asset. And the idea of trying to require every American to be appraised annually, private businesses, farms, art collections, classic cars, again, the bureaucracy would be staggering for that. And even if you could manage it, even if you could, these numbers still don't solve the fiscal crisis and financial crisis we have. The Congressional Budget Office, again, a fairly independent arm of the government, estimates that a 10% annual wealth tax on the top richest 1,000 people in America, that would raise $500 to $600 billion a year, maybe a little more. But that's not even our interest payment on the debt. Our interest payment now is about $1 trillion. So by putting in a wealth tax, you don't even cover the interest payment. There's not enough there to materially affect the deficits we have. I mean, so if you think about this, you're not only not covering anything, but the markets would convulse. Can you imagine what the stock market response to this would be? So your 401k value, your retirement funds, your pension funds, they would be decimated by this. You don't think entrepreneurs would move capital offshore? So it would that money the CBO estimates coming in is on perfect compliance. Well, that's never going to happen. Innovation would slow. You'd hurt the middle class, which is why they don't do it. They tell you about it and get elected on it and scream about it and raise money, but they don't ever do it because it would ultimately hurt the middle class, and they all know it. The lesson is simple economics, because once you've consumed this engine of wealth creation, once you've consumed it, you've destroyed it. Now, when I talk to people about that, and I hear it when I give speeches, I hear a lot of people say, well, it's not about math. The world's not that cold. It's about fairness. That's a valid emotion. I mean, the rise of billionaires has become a symbol of frustration for many people. You got housing costs, student debt, wages that don't seem to keep up. I mean, it feels unjust. It does, that a handful of people have the money to fly to space when others can't buy groceries. But envy and economics do not mix well. We saw that play out time and time again in the 20th century. History has shown us overwhelmingly that the societies that punish wealth, they don't eliminate poverty, they eliminate prosperity. There's no joke about the Soviet system. In America, we had unequal distribution of wealth. In the Soviet Union, you had equal distribution of poverty. Because when you confiscate wealth, you remove the creation. I mean, innovation shrinks, capital flees, jobs disappear. It's inevitable that that's going to happen, and those at the bottom suffer the most. So let's try to ground this capitalism that I cherish so much in morality. It's important for us to know honest, true facts. The top 1% of income earners in this country already pay about 46% of all federal income taxes. You can check that with the tax department, the IRS itself. The top 10% pays about 75%. That's staggering. Half of Americans pay little or no income tax. Little or none. Now that doesn't make a moral tax, justification, but what it does say is we have an extraordinarily progressive tax system already. How much higher do you want it to go? If you want the 1% paying more than 46 in the top 70, do you want the top 10% to pay all the taxes? Well, how soon do you think, or how long is it going to take before the reaction to that is to move capital offshore? We live in a global economy. Don't think these people don't have the ability to move their companies with them. You have to look at it honestly. The United States does not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. This year alone, we're going to spend about $2 trillion more than we bring in. So we'll bring in, as I said, about $6 trillion. We'll spend about $8 trillion. That's a spending problem. And that's not going away without structural reform because you can't tax the billionaires to fix it, as we've shown. Taxing billionaires isn't going to solve that problem. So I want to broaden out the lens for you a little bit. I want to say what makes billionaires possible in the first place. It isn't luck or cronyism alone, and they do exist. I don't deny that, especially the more government gets involved in things, the more crony it becomes. I get it. But at the core, it's the power of compounding innovation. When a founder creates a product that millions of people voluntarily buy from them, wealth does tend to concentrate because values concentrate. It's not exploitation, it's scale. That's the story and the lesson from Henry Ford. Bill Gates, he did it with software. He created a scalable value proposition that people bought. Elon Musk, he's done it with electric cars, rockets, and everything else. Nobody's forced to buy a Tesla, but they do it because they like the product, and that scale made Elon Musk very wealthy. And each of these represents not just personal gain, but a massive, massive social benefit. How many jobs have been created by these companies? How much wealth for the society was created? How many new technologies were created? And how much better is the pricing structure because they exist? Free markets and capitalism give us the highest standard of living ever known in the history of the world. And for those of you who say, well, look at Denmark and Finland, they are highly capitalistic economies. They have a very progressive tax system like we do, but they're very capitalistic. They are not socialist utopias. There isn't a successful socialist country on the planet, never has been and never will be. So rather perhaps than shouting tax the billionaires, what we ought to be doing is asking how can we help more Americans become millionaires? And that's the whole financial literacy program that we do. It's the reason for this show. If Americans understood compounding risk, and they could compound opportunity as well as they do celebrity gossip, we'd have more small business owners, fewer resentment-driven slogans. That is the constructive path to follow. That's how capitalism can renew itself. So just for fun, let's play out this redistribution fantasy one last time. We take 14.2 trillion in global billionaire wealth and we hand it out to every American. Not everybody on the globe, just Americans. We each get about $43,000. That's great for a year. Then the money's gone. Inflation spikes from the sudden demand. And the businesses that once employed millions, well, they're shuttered. You can't confiscate the factory and still expect the cars to roll off the line. It doesn't work that way. Mandami will find that with the grocery stores when he tries to socialize those. You can't seize server farms and expect the internet to go off running like it does today. I mean, wealth is not a vault full of gold. It's a living network of productive assets working together. That's the miracle of the American economy. When we break that network through confiscation, everybody becomes poorer, not richer. That's even why economists on the left will eventually admit that the only way to get sustainable equality is through growth. It's not through confiscation. It's not through redistribution. It's through growth in the underlying economy. So the question we should all ask isn't how do we penalize the billionaires? It's how do we grow the economy? Not how do we confiscate more? How do we build a bigger pie? We are not in a zero-sum economy. The fact that that person has it doesn't mean you don't. The question is how do we work together to build the bigger pie? American capitalism has given us the biggest pie in the history of the world. If we want more fairness in our economy, we need to build the bigger pie. So let's not destroy the productive systems. Let's not destroy these systems and processes that have created this wealth. And let's not buy into political slogans that sound good, but at the end of the day are really worthless slogans. Well, I appreciate your sharing time with me. I'm glad that we could. And again, this financial path today is dedicated to Zoran Mandami, the new mayor of New York. I find it sad that people elected someone with no experience, no credentials, himself a spoiled little rich kid, who's claiming to be for the average Joe middle-class person. If he was, what he would be doing in New York is cutting taxes, cutting regulation, and building a booming economy that lifted people up. Instead, he wants to confiscate and redistribute. He will become wealthy. It's just like the Soviet system. The top 1% lived really well in the Soviet Union. The bottom 99% didn't have food on the shelves. You don't build an economy through confiscation. You build it through productive enterprise. And in the United States, we've experienced that for 250 years. We are as close as you could be to Adam Smith's notion of a free market. Let's not give it up now because there's some inequality. We could talk about healthcare the same way. Why do you think healthcare is out of control? It's not the private markets that are screwed up. It's the government controls in the Affordable Care Act that have screwed it up. Do you remember looking at tuition growth back in the 80s when you could get college tuition and you could afford it on a summer job, and then it got out of whack somehow? It got out of whack when the government started handling the student loans because they threw money at the colleges, and as a result of that, college tuition skyrocketed. The same thing happened in the so-called Affordable Care Act. The government was sending subsidies to the insurance companies who were eating them up and just raising prices because their subsidies got bigger. The problem is government. And until we learn that as a people and an economy and relearn it from the lessons of history, our country will not thrive. but will settle in on an envy economy that will be destructive for all. I'm Steve Beaman. Thanks for watching.